Welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about the Philidor position, which I've been told is an important stepping stone into learning further endgame theory. First, a big disclaimer. I'm not a chess master, I'm just a random chess person, and I've only recently learned this. The only reason I'm explaining what I've learned is to be sure that I understand it. Hopefully, you can learn something from this as well. Now, first, it's important to understand that the Philidor position includes each side having one rook and a king, and only one side having a pawn. That side has the slight advantage due to having that pawn, but the side without the pawn can force a draw if they play carefully. In order for it to qualify as the Philidor position, a few guidelines have to be met. One of those is that the side that has the pawn cannot yet be closer than the fifth rank, its own fifth rank, or the fourth rank of the defender. If it's any closer than that, then it's not the Philidor position, technically speaking. So it has to be at least just past the center line or further back, and the same thing with the king of that same side. Cannot be any closer than that. And the defender's king has to be on the queening square or the promotion square of that pawn, directly in front of it. It's also a requirement that the defender's rook has to be on the third rank, or if it's their turn, able to quickly get to the third rank, quickly and safely get to the third rank. And the other side, of course, has a rook. It does not have to be here. Their rook could be over here or someplace else. It's not that important, as long as it's not someplace where it's about to be captured. These are the requirements for the Philidor position to be met. If this rook, for example, is here, this is not the Philidor position, because this rook cannot safely and quickly get to the third rank. It would require at least 2 moves in order to do that, and by then the opponent would have caused us some trouble. So that's the requirements. That's the setup for the Philidor position. What the defender's job is to keep this rook on the third rank, and the idea of that is to prevent the king from moving forward. Obviously, what they want to eventually do is move this pawn forward and promote it, but they can't right now. And if they do, that's the one thing that I wondered early on. If they do move this pawn forward, we can then take our rook back and begin checking their king from behind. So they tend to wait to push the pawn until they're ready. Now, at various points, the attacking side will check the defender's king, and if we are the defender, we will just move up directly toward the pawn, and often they will come check us again, and then we will go directly back to stay in front of the pawn. If their rook comes over here and does not check us, we can just shuffle our rook to any of the safe squares on the third rank. Right now, these are the safe squares, but once this rook moves, obviously, then that spot will be defended, but then this would be a safe square, and so on. Now, I'm going to attach here a video of me that I made earlier today playing against Stockfish from the Philidor position, and I was able to successfully draw. The side with the pawn simply can't promote it, and that's the main idea here. They can't bring their king forward to guard the advance of this pawn because our rook is here, and if they try to advance the pawn, we can go back to some of these squares and begin checking them from behind. And since their pawn has advanced, they can no longer hide in front of the pawn because our king is too close. So some very simple principles to remember. It took a little bit of practice and a lot of study, but I think I've got it solved. So watch the clip. Okay, I'm now in the Lichess board editor, and now that we know that all other sites that define the Philidor position say that this is not the Philidor position, that it's rook plus pawn versus rook 1, then we can play this. So let's continue from here, and we'll play with the black pieces against Stockfish. I'm not sure why that's not cropped correctly. Okay, that's better. Now we know that our first move has to be to bring our rook to the third rank, which was not possible with the board editor position that said Philidor position. Okay, and we know that if we keep this rook on the third rank, it prevents white's king from moving forward. And we know that there are unsafe squares here. For example, their rook can capture there, their pawn, and king. So that leaves us 3 safe positions on this rank. So we will go back and forth. If they check us, which I think they will now, they will not. If they check us, we will move 1 forward. If they do not check us, we will continue shuffling our rook on the third rank, our third rank, which is the 6th rank. And we know that if they try to push the pawn forward, we will bring our rook all the way back. Okay, they have brought their rook back. And their king over here now changes which squares on the other side we can go to, because their rook still protects that one, but now their king and pawn and king protect those. So these are our 3 safe squares over here. So again, we are going to shuffle. And of course, if they don't move the pawn within 50 moves, it's a draw. If there are no captures or no pawn moves in 50 moves, that's a draw by 50 move rule, I guess. And then if they do move the pawn, then we will go back. Okay, they're changing which squares we can go to, but we do know if they check us, we will just go forward. Or did I mess up here? Because, yeah, if here I just move forward toward the pawn. Okay, and as long as they're on the back rank, I can't come back, so I stay there and shuffle the rook. If they check us, we will go back. They did not check us. So we will shuffle. And then we will go back. So there's just a few things to remember here, and we can force a draw now that we're in the correct position. But we have to remember which are our safe squares. Those keep changing depending on where the king moves and where the rook moves, so that's not safe anymore. But this should be. And again, at some point we know they're going to move the pawn forward, and when they do, we will go all the way back. Okay, now their king is cutting off all of those squares, and their pawn is cutting off this one, and their rook is cutting off this one. I don't know if the king moves away like that, if it's okay to come in front of the pawn. I really have no idea, but I am going to not do that just because I'm not sure. I think it would be fine. It actually threatens to take the pawn, and so that would force them to go back to defend it. But and I don't know how many moves this will take, but the goal is to draw, because we know we can't win unless they make some sort of grievous error, which Stockfish probably will not do. But I do notice that Stockfish is trying to make sure that it does not repeat positions, because we know that if a position is repeated so many times, that's also a draw by repetition. Okay. Let's see. I think we shuffle the rook. Are they ready to bring the pawn forward now? Usually at some point they decide to bring the pawn forward once they've exhausted all the other possibilities or see that we are not going to make a mistake. Okay, now it wants to repeat. That's unusual. But yeah, again, it chose a slightly different position. So as long as we don't make a mistake, we can draw this. That's the idea. Okay, the king has decided to come back around on this side. Once it gets there, then we will have squares on the other side that are safe for our rook. I don't know how long this will take. I don't know now. Should I go all the way across, or should I just go here? But then the king will come forward probably, and then we will go all the way across anyway. Right, so we can come across here. then move the king forward. I know there are other safe options in some of these cases, but I am trying to stick with the ones that are easiest to remember, which is to stay right in front of this pawn as long as possible. Okay, it's gone back there. We can take our king back, or we could just shuffle our rook again. Then we go back. Is it ready to move the pawn now? No, it's not ready to move the pawn now. So we shuffle the rook. Okay, it's bringing the king on that side. We're at 45 moves now, so that's probably the longest I've ever... Okay, it's moved the pawn. Okay, that is the key moment, because now when we go back here and start checking the king, they can't hide behind the pawn, whereas they could have done that before. Before, if we had gone back here and tried to check their king, they could have hidden in front of the pawn, and then our rook would be stuck back there. But now I think we can go back there. I think we have to go back there. Okay, and here we move forward toward the pawn. That keeps the king from coming closer. Now, if we move back and the king comes closer, we check it. Okay, or if they don't check us, we check them. And if they come toward us, we take their pawn. Because they will not want to repeat, I know that. So if they start coming toward us, we will want to take their pawn. They're keeping their king close to it in order to save the pawn. And really, it's going to be perpetual check until they start coming closer to us, which I think they will eventually do. Not yet. Now they're fairly distant from that pawn, so they don't want to start coming closer to us over there. But they might here. Nope. I know that the computer will try not to repeat moves. If it blocks with the rook, we will take the rook because our king will be able to get to that pawn. Okay, it says we reached the threefold repetition, which was a draw. So we have successfully understood the Philidor position, and hopefully I have added a intro to this video, and then get ready to see the conclusion. Okay, I hope that was informative. I hope you understand about the Philidor position now. I think I do. I'm going to continue to practice it, and I'm going to try to keep it in mind. Obviously, one difficult thing about a position like this is that it takes being reached. It requires that you get to this position. And at some point in the game, all these pawns and kings are going to be back on home squares, and they're going to have to advance to this position. But it is something to look out for if you find yourself in a rook versus rook endgame where the other side has the pawn, and you're able to get your king directly in front of it. Then you can successfully defend and force the draw rather than being beaten. And if you're the side that has the pawn, you try to avoid getting into this exact position, especially if you think your opponent knows how to play it. So thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.